Lauren here, and today I am going to be talking about the first books that I ever read. On this channel I talk a lot about books I'm reading now, my favourite books now, and my favourite books of my teenage years. But obviously before I was a teenager I was a small human, and back then I still read as much as I do now. When I was a small human I just read books that had completely different content in them, and books that I have not read or looked at in a very long time. And the other day I rearranged my bookshelf, as I do whenever I'm stressed. It is literally my de-stress thing. I come home, I feel really wound up, and I just take everything off my shelf and rearrange it. That's what I do. It's anxiety management. So I rearranged them in colour order, which meant that there were some books that were in series that I read when I was little that usually had just stayed together on the children's bookshelf, that I moved around to fit with the colours. And I was like, I haven't read these in so long. It's like, I've never even spoken about them. I don't really talk about them. So I've put together a list of the very first books that I read by myself, which I wanted to talk about because I love talking about my childhood books, because they are the reason why I read so much now. And you can see, based on the types of books that they are, how it affected my reading now, like how it affected the books that I like now and the books that I liked in my teenagers, which I think is really cool. So obviously, like, before I could read myself, I was read books. My mum is a very big reader. Sometimes we'll be downstairs and I'll be sat on like one couch reading, and my mum will be on the other one reading, and my dad will just be sat there like, why is no one talking to me? My dad used to read when he was little. He used to read the Narnia books, and that's what he always used to tell me about. I don't remember the last time I saw my brother pick up a book, but my brother is a lot older than me, so he doesn't live with me anymore. Yeah, so me and my mum, like, we've just always really liked books, and she loves them as much as me. Like, she gets excited if she got to meet her favourite authors and stuff. I have my mum to thank. That's like one of the things that I'm always so grateful for, that since I was very little she's introduced books into my life. So she read me books like Guess How Much I Love You, and I Want My Potty, and Very Hungry Caterpillar, and We're Going on a Bear Hunt, and Each Peach Pear Plum. That was another one that was read to me when I was really little. And a book called Laura's Star. They were the first books that I had read to me, and the first stories that I loved. Laura's Star was one of my favourite books ever. I actually have the DVD because they turned it into like a small animated film. So they were the first introduction to books and reading that I remember. I remember my mum reading me those stories. My memories, this is really weird, like my memories tend to start from when I was about 5 years old. I have like flashbacks to things, and that's sort of when I start remembering things. So those are the books that I remember. So I first started reading like proper books probably when I was about 6 or 7. Now the first books that I ever read myself, like aside from Biff and Chip and the Magic Key and the school books, were Hodgeheg by Dick King-Smith, and this was a book that we had in school, and it's a really thin book. And actually the other day I put it out at work. I know we've got a copy, and I'm really contemplating rebuying it because I don't think I ever had my own copy. I think it was just a copy that I used to take from the school library. And actually the Hodgeheg is a really like an educational book, and it's all about road safety crossing. For some reason in the UK, I don't know if this is ever something that was advertised everywhere else in different parts of the world, but we had this road safety advert which had hedgehogs that would safely cross the street. And I don't know if this book ever was like an inspiration from that advert or vice versa, but this book is called The Hodgeheg, and it is about a hedgehog family who live at number 5A, and Max is the youngest one. He wants to go over to the park because the park has got juicy slugs and snails and food that he wants to eat, and a lily pond and water, and he wants to go over to this park, but he needs to find a way to cross the road because he lives on the opposite side of the road to the park. So his first attempt to do that, he gets a little bump on the head, and then everything becomes jumbled, and he isn't a hedgehog anymore, he is a hodgeheg. And then it continues, and he's still trying to find a way to cross the road, and then he enlists the help of the lollipop lady to help cross the road. If you don't have lollipop ladies where you're from, that's probably such a weird thing. They look like this. This is a lollipop lady. They help children cross roads by schools. I just realised how weird Britain sounds now. The Hodgeheg was one of the first books that I read after I finished all the Biff and Chip and Magic Key ones, so yeah, it was really cool. You're probably also wondering what the hell Biff and Chip are. They were like the books that you would read in school that were like your reading stage books, so you'd move up a stage every time you finished the set of books that was in that one, but they were never like ones you'd read for fun. And then the next first books that I ever read were the My Secret Unicorn books by Linda Chapman. I have all of these books. These were just my two favourite ones of this series. So this is Dreams Come True, which was the second one, and Starlight Surprise, which was the third one in the series. These would probably have been in the 5 to 8 section of a shop. I don't know if they still exist. I haven't ever seen them in my Waterstones. This is about a girl called Lauren Foster who has a horse called Twilight, and the horse can turn into a unicorn. Twilight star, twinkling high above so far, shining light, shining bright, will grant my wish tonight. Let my little horse forlorn be at last a unicorn. So her horse turns into a unicorn, and then her and her unicorn horse get into lots of adventures and do loads of cool things. For those who don't know, my full name is actually Lauren. Ren is a nickname, it's not my full name. My full name is Lauren, which sounds weird to say on here. Hi everyone, Lauren here. That doesn't work, does it? No. Lauren on the road. No, shut up. When I first found these books, I was like, she's called Lauren too! I was really, really happy, and I got really, really, really excited because there was a character, this really cool character in a book, and she had a unicorn, and I was like, I want a unicorn, I want a unicorn. I always wanted a horse. I live where racing is really, really popular, and I don't really agree with horse racing, but because I live in a town where it's so popular, so many people here have horses, and I grew up with friends that had horses, members of my family had horses, so I always wanted a horse, and I just didn't have any concept of how expensive horses are. I really wanted a horse when I was a kid, and then I read these and I was like, she is who I want to be. Like, she's got the same name as me, she's got like the same hair as me, like she looks quite similar to me, she even got a fringe like I have, and I want a horse that turns into a unicorn. I lived for these books. I was so excited when they came out. Then obviously I won't go too much into detail with this one, but I can't not mention Harry Potter. I owe my imagination to those books. The first Harry Potter book I read by myself was Goblet of Fire. I read it when I was 7 and I loved them, and they are basically the reason why I am so invested in reading and books and everything now, because they are just my favourite things ever. So yeah, everyone knows what Harry Potter is, but that was also one of the first books that I ever read when I first started to read and could read stuff, so yay! And then also we have the Roald Dahl books, just Roald Dahl in general. He was one of the first authors that I ever started getting into. I think I read SEO Trot, The Twits, The Witches first because they are smaller books, so I started with those and then very quickly moved on to Matilda, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, George's Marvellous Medicine. Out of all of those, Matilda was my favourite. Like Matilda, I love that. Matilda is one of my favourite fictional female humans. Really found a friend in her, and it was just, I really love that book. And I remember I was probably about 7 or 8 when I read that book for the first time, and I just really, really, really loved it, and it just really meant a lot to me, and it remains to be one of my favourite books and one of my favourite Roald Dahl books. And then also Sleepovers, and this was like one of my favourite books ever as a kid. Ever. I love this book. It's by Jacqueline Wilson, and it's about these friends. They are like the ABCDE club because their names all start with the first letters of those names, and they all have sleepovers for their birthday. And this book was really good because this book actually has a disabled character in it. One of the girls, Daisy, I think it's Daisy, she has a sister who is in a wheelchair, and that was the first book in which I'd read, and there was a character in it that was a disabled character, and it was really good representation. It was really good, I think, to be in a children's book. There are people in the world that are disabled. That's not weird. We shouldn't treat that as weird. It shouldn't be something that should be made fun of. I remember reading it and thinking to myself, I really liked that. Like, I liked the fact that there was diverse characters, and even then I remember thinking, this is amazing. This is not in any other book I've read before. It was nice to read the book and see that there were people around me that were represented in the book. It's 112 pages long. It's really not that long at all. It's really small, and I just thought it was really great. I remember reading it and loving it and wanting to just have loads of sleepovers. But yeah, no, it was really, really, really cool. Jacqueline Wilson is fantastic, and I think the things she writes about are really good for children to read, and just a really good representation of so many different things. So those are sort of like the first books that I ever read. It's really cool and really interesting to think about, because those were the first books that I read when I was little, when I was sort of like 7 years old, and I'm first reading books, and then it really led me into things. So like, My Secret Unicorn is obviously fantasy. It's about a horse that turns into a unicorn, and that is not something that we see happen. And then obviously those books, my love for fantasy sparked. So then I started reading Harry Potter, and then Harry Potter, the final one of those came out when I was 12. So Harry Potter had gone on then throughout my childhood and into essentially like almost the first year of my teenage years. And then a couple of months after Deathly Hallows came out, I read Twilight. I read Harry Potter, finished that, read Twilight, read The Hunger Games, read Divergent, fell into young adult. And obviously Roald Dahl books are kind of similar, and sort of they've got that element to them that's like real life, but also slight magic as well. So I read those, and then also with the Jacqueline Wilson books I ended up reading Love Lessons, The Illustrated Mom, Candy Floss, which led me into that, which led me into a series called Consequences, which then led me into young adult stuff. So because they kind of combined, now I read predominantly young adult, which is either fantasy young adult or contemporary young adult. It's really interesting to have had books that when I was so young that was so varied, to have the fantasy elements to it and to introduce me straight away to talking horses that turn into unicorns is completely normal, and I can read any book with any kind of fantasy thing in it. That's fine. Really cool, because that completely opened my mind. Harry Potter just introduced me to everything, which was totally fine for then the scope for me to love everything else. And then also because I was reading books like Sleepovers, and they were just contemporary books about people and everyday people and lots of different people, it was really cool to then lead me into other books, which led me into my teenage books that were also contemporaries. Obviously, like, I read other books as well. I read like Disney stories and fairy tales. I was brought up on Disney, and then I also discovered anime and manga, so there were other things that influenced me as well. But as main books that aren't just like generic like Disney stories and fairy tales and stuff, those were the books that I read when I was little that I distinctly remember in my mind, and that I distinctly remember like shaped me, and that I've kept, and like the books that I've wanted to have forever, and the books that I would reread as well. I really want to reread My Secret Unicorn, like low-key kind of want to do that. It's really cool, and when I was rearranging my shelf and I found them all, I wanted to talk about them and turn it into a video, because I think it's really cool to remember what it was that like kick-started your reading. And even if the first books you ever read were when you were like 10, 11, that's absolutely fine. It just happens to be that mine was like 6 and 7. I'd love to know your book, like your books, the first books that you ever read, the first like proper books that weren't school books. I'd love to know. I'd love to know what it was that kick-started your reading journey. That sounds really cheesy, doesn't it? But you get me. I'd really love to know. I think it would be really interesting. I think it's really good to remember where like it all started, and where your reading life kind of came from. I hope that you liked this video. If you're new here, I make bookish videos a couple of times a week, so if you would like to stick around and join us, then you can do that. And as usual, all of my links will be in the description below if you would like to come hang out with me on other social medias. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you're doing really, really, really well, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!